Hey everyone, this is Chris with Overclockers Club. Today from Corsair we've got the Spec-Omega RGB, really cool case. And if you think a computer case is just a box to stick all your hardware in, well you're wrong. And I'm going to prove it to you with what's inside this box. So out of the box, I've always admired the way Corsair handled their packaging. They always use very robust materials. This is a closed cell foam. You can probably drop this thing off of a building and it would survive. Wouldn't try it, just saying, you probably could. Got the owner's manual. We've got a small little Allen wrench. We'll see what that's for later. We'll get the foam end caps off here. A nice one on the side here to protect the glass. There's a glass panel on this side that you'll see in a moment. That's all well protected. Get it out of the bag. Now, this is the Spec-Omega RGB. It's available in white, as you can see here, and black. The Spec-Omega, the non-RGB, it's just a plain Spec-Omega, it's available in black, white, and red. Now, whether the RGB series will be available in red, I don't know. It might be, it might not be. We'll just have to see. And again, I like the way Corsair does their packaging. All the cases I've ever reviewed from Corsair, they've all arrived in perfect condition. Alright, now we'll go over the exterior features. Now we'll look a little more closely across the top of the case. You can see the mesh there, which is for nice airflow, and then the other side of the case here, the top there, is solid. Looking down across the front, we've got our power button in there, and we have our two USB 3.0 ports, headphone jack, microphone jack, a hard drive activity light, and our reset button. Now this is not actually a vented mesh panel here. It looks like it might be, but it's actually glass, which is a really nice touch. I do like that, and there you can see the RGB fan sort of peeking out from behind the glass. And then down at the bottom we have our fresh air intake, that mesh panel there. And then the feet, as you can see here, they have a nice shape to them too. We'll have to get the case flipped over there, it'll be easier to see. But they do give you nice clearance so that if you do have your case on a carpeted floor, you can still get some airflow underneath. Now, looking on the side here, we have a metal panel, smooth black, sort of a matte finish. And on this side, we have a glass panel, and it does have a slight smoke tint to it. The fasteners, as you'll notice, are a little different. They are Allen head screws, which are more of a flat flush mount instead of the thumb screws that you often see. And that's where this little guy here, the Allen wrench that is included, comes in. You'll need this little fella to get these fasteners out. Now let's look at the rear of the case. So the rear, we have the 120 millimeter rear fan, the exhaust fan. That is also an RGB fan, just like the front. So you do get two fans with this case that are included. Opening for the I/O panel on the motherboard is right here. We have 7 expansion slots, a vented section here to let a little more air in, and then at the bottom is where your power supply goes. And looking at the bottom of the case, in typical Corsair fashion, we do have a vented panel there for the power supply intake, and it comes with a nice filter panel there to keep the dust from being sucked into your power supply. And we have no other vents along the bottom, it's all solid. We do have a thumb screw here. This is to remove the hard drive cage, which we'll see here in just a little bit. We go ahead and loosen the last fastener. Now this is glass, it is tempered, so it's very strong, but you still have to be very careful when you handle it. It's not like the old metal side panels from years ago. Worst that would happen if you dropped one is it would just make a lot of noise. So, looking inside the case, first thing that jumps out is we have the shrouds that cover the power supply and the hard drive cage. Now, some people like these, some people don't. These do cover your power supply, so if you have a power supply you want to show off, it makes it a little difficult because these shrouds are typically riveted in place. However, in this case, Corsair had the wisdom to make them removable, which we will see in a little bit. But we do have this slot in the top there that allows for cable passage. Some of your cables come up to the bottom of the motherboard and you need to do that. Looking at the front there, there's the bottom 120 millimeter fan. And the hard drive cage in there is 2 positions. So there's a position in there, and you can actually move it over slightly to give you a different amount of clearance here behind the fan. So if you put a radiator in there, you're going to need a little more clearance so that your fan is not right up against the hard drive cage. But the nice thing is, any fan you have here is going to push air across your hard drives if you have any hard drives in there. Now we have a generous cutout in the motherboard tray. We have our access holes here to fish any CPU power cables through to the top of the motherboard. And then over here on this side we have some nice grommets to pass cables through, and a couple of holes here also to pass cables and wires through also. Now we will go ahead and look at the other side. I've already got the back cover off. So the metal side cover on the back of the motherboard tray there has been removed so we can see what's going on. This is something that's really nice. We've got room for 1, 2, 3 solid state drives. They pop into the little pocket there, and this little tab snaps it into place, and there's a little spring there that offers a little assist or a push. When you pop this tab, it'll push the solid state drive up a little bit, make it easier to get out. And you can take this entire assembly out here with these 2 thumb screws. You can remove those and that thing pops right out. Looking down here toward the bottom, we have our hard drive cage, and in it we have 2 hard drive trays which will handle 3.5-inch drives. So you can get 2 of the 3.5-inch drives in there. We also have holes already in there. If you want to put solid state drives in there, a couple more 2.5-inch drives, you can certainly do that. And this entire hard drive cage does come out, which we'll see here in a little bit. If you want to make some more room, you can stash away all of your extra cables here in this little chamber in front of the power supply, unless you have a really long power supply, and you won't have a whole lot of room for that. But standard power supplies will give you a little bit of room. If you leave the shrouds in place, it covers all of your extra cables and makes your cable management a little nicer looking. If you want to take your shrouds off and show off your power supply, of course, you won't have the ability to hide your cables quite as well. And then we've got these guys here. This is to supply power to the RGB system. The bottom right here, we've got one RGB controller. And then up here to the left a little bit, kind of in the middle of the case on the side, we have a smaller, another RGB controller there. So now we'll go ahead and get this thing torn apart and see what it looks like with all the panels removed. All right, I have the entire chassis stripped down, took off everything that I could possibly unbolt. I want to talk about the front here first. A lot easier if you do take the front panel off. And when you do that, one thing I'll point out down here in the bottom, there is a small plug right there, and that's what supplies the power for the RGB lighting to the front. So you want to make sure when you pop the front off, you do disconnect that cable. Now, like I said, take the front off. It's going to be a lot easier to put your liquid cooling radiator in the front there if you like. You can go with a 120, a 140, a 240 or 280, or all the way up to 360 millimeter front radiator. And any of Corsair is fine. All-in-one cooling systems would be right at home in this case. Now another thing I removed there were the shrouds from the bottom that we saw earlier. They actually come out in 2 pieces. There's one piece, and here's the other piece right there. That's what goes over the back of the power supply. If you have a power supply you want to show off, then you can take these shrouds out. You are not limited by shrouds that are often riveted in cases. These are fully removable. Great feature, Corsair. I also took out the hard drive cage too. If you go with up to 3 solid state drives, you don't even need that cage in there. Put the shrouds back in and you have a perfect way to cover up excess cables to make your cable routing nice and clean. And looking at the top, you do have the option to put a 120 millimeter or a 240 millimeter liquid cooled system at the top there if you like, or you can just put a couple of fans, a couple of 120s or a couple of 140s. Alright, I'm getting the build underway here. Did want to point something out. Since my power supply here is not modular, that means I have a lot of excess cables here that are going along for the ride. And with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of the fact that I can pull this hard drive cage out here, since I'm not really going to be using it, and I can use all this extra space here to stash my extra cables. And when I put the shrouds back on, since I'm not terribly concerned with showing off my power supply, that should make for a nice clean build. The motherboard is now installed. I still have a few little things to button up, but there you can see the Noctua D14 CPU cooler. That is a very large air cooler. That is the test cooler that I use for my cases. If you look in the back there, what I wanted to mention was when you have a large cooler like this, you got to make sure everything on the back of the motherboard there is plugged in ahead of time, because there's not a lot of room to reach in there otherwise. For example, this cable right here, that is the CPU power cable on this particular Z87 motherboard. Now, not all motherboards are laid out that way, so this won't be a problem for everybody. But if you get your cooler in there, get your motherboard installed, and you realize you forgot to plug that cable in, you're going to have to pull the cooler back out, and that's not a lot of fun. So just keep that in mind. Also, some cases this top panel can be taken off with screws, which makes the installation a little easier. This one, however, is actually riveted on, so that's not an option. But just something to keep in mind. Now that the case is powered up, everything's installed, we're getting ready for the thermal testing, but I do really need to talk about the RGB controls, and that's probably the coolest part of this case. There's the rear 120 millimeter, actually it's an HD 120 rear fan, and there's essentially the same fan in the front, 120 millimeter fan. The reason I mentioned the fan style is you need to select that in the iCUE software, which is right there. You need to download that from the Corsair website, install it, and that will allow you full control over each fan independently and the light strip independently, or all coordinated together, however you want to do it. Now, if you don't download the software, you get this cool rainbow lighting effect, which is the default. But if you really want to unleash the power, and I can only touch on a little bit of it here because I could spend an hour just going over all the cool things that this does by itself. But you can see there's a graphical representation of what's happening on the light strip right now. So if I want to change that, I can come down here and change it to, let's just say marquee, for example. And there, the marquee is cycling, and there you can see it on the screen. If I want to change the color, I can just come over here to blue, and there you see it changes to blue. And I can also independently change the fans. I can turn the fans off. I can control individual LEDs if I like. So there's an enormous amount of power here. So there's the marquee in red on the bottom fan. If I want to change that to blue, there we go. And we've got those coordinated. You even have the ability to change the color of the RGB system based on the temperature of your system. So it's kind of a thermal alarm or visual way to see what's going on temperature-wise. Another cool feature. So you could spend a lot of time just playing with that by itself. But I just wanted to kind of give you a real quick overview. An enormous amount of power and control. Okay, now finally we are ready for some thermal testing. Okay, so right now we are idling. The system is not under a load, so I don't really expect to see anything as far as a drastic temperature change or anything. Of course, there's the glass there, so you have to get that pretty hot before you'll see anything through it. Look up here at the top, and that's where I would expect to see some heat also when we get the system going, but we're close to 30°C there, just a tick under. And then we'll look back here at the rear of the case, and there's the exhaust fan. We're again around 28, 29°C. Oh, there we go, 31. And then there's the graphics card right in there, and then the power supply is the hot spot down there at the bottom. So we'll go ahead and put a little bit of a load on it and see what the temps look like. So with the overclock of 4.2 gigahertz, we are looking at the top there around 35, close to 35°C at the top. Now if you put a couple fans on the top of the case, you'll certainly move more air through it. And then front of the case, we really don't see a huge change there. That's not really a big surprise. Over on the side, we've got, again, a little bit of reflection, but you can see the temperature there. That's where the CPU cooler is, right there behind the glass. And then we come around to the back of the case, and we're close to 40°C there, right around the exhaust fan at the rear. Looking down at the power supply. Of course, it's working a little harder. This is not a huge overclock, but I think it shows that this case, even with just the two factory fans, has adequate airflow, and you've got room for more fans at the top. Well, it's time to wrap all this up. Thermal testing proved that this case is definitely a contender for keeping the heat down. It has good airflow. I'm sure adding a couple more fans would make it even better. And liquid cool system would also look right at home in this case, either in the front or up at the top. And I am quite mesmerized by the cool lighting effects here. And this is the Spec-Omega RGB. This one comes in around $150. So it's more money than the regular Spec-Omega, but you do get this cool RGB system that you can add on to, more fans. Add a light strip on there if you like. And like I said, you could easily kill an hour just playing with all the different lighting effects here. And if you add more to it, you can have even more fun. I think Corsair really hit the ball out of the park with the Spec-Omega RGB. You've got great styling, typical Corsair quality, fit and finish, again, top notch. The RGB system, which is a blast to play with, you get all of that for around the $150 price point. I think they hit the ball out of the park, like I said. So this is Chris with Overclockers Club. Don't forget to subscribe and also leave some comments. Tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. I want to make these videos better for you.